Today I'm going to start telling you the whole story of Greek mythology from beginning to end in chronological order. Let's go. Just a reminder, my dear mythomaniac or mythologist friend. I always mix up those words. Anyway, Greek mythology has several different versions. There are lots of little stories scattered around. I'm going to follow the main ones and the main versions of the Greek stories. Okay, and maybe I'll tweak a myth or something just to make it fit chronologically. In the beginning of everything, there was emptiness, and in that emptiness, at the start of creation, chaos emerged by itself, out of nothing. The first of those, known as the protogenoi, which, despite the fancy word, just means the primordials, who were the first race of beings that would give rise to what we call the world. Chaos was the lower atmosphere that surrounds the earth, both the invisible air and the twilight, the mist, and also the haze that was around the earth. He was the source of all creation. Chaos ended up generating new beings, completely alone, because in fact, he was neither male nor female. Among these beings was Nyx, which would be the night, and Erebus, the darkness, and since chaos is the source of everything that surrounds the universe, he also ended up generating love, which was Erebus. Well, from the union of Nyx and Erebus, Ether and Amera were born, which would be the day itself, and Nyx also ended up generating on her own Thanatos and Hypnos, and also other beings. And from the very form of chaos, Gaia was also born, who was the earth itself. Gaia was kind of feeling a bit lonely there. She didn't want to play disc jockey, so she ended up creating a companion for herself, who was Uranus. Uranus covered all of Gaia. When I say that he covered all of Gaia, I also mean that he got intimate with her, actually, more than once. And with that, they ended up creating the Aurea, which were the mountains, the primordial sea, known as Pontus, and also a race of gods known as the Titans. And among them were Oceanus, Coeus, Creus, Hyperion, Iapetus, Thea, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and also the beautiful Tethys. And after them, the one who would become the main figure of that period was born, Cronos, who was known as the Cunning One, and the youngest and most terrible of these children. And he hated Uranus in an unbelievable way. Since there was no television at that time, Gaia kind of kept having a thing with Uranus, and from that the Cyclopes were born, or the three primordial Cyclopes known as Brontes, Steropes, and Arges. And again, three other children were born from Gaia and Uranus, the so-called Hecatoncheires. They were monsters with many heads and many arms, extremely powerful. Cottus, Briareus, and Gaius. They were so frightening and so powerful that even Uranus was afraid of them. He ended up losing them as soon as they were born and shoved them back into Gaia in a way that must have been very uncomfortable. But Uranus apparently liked to do that kind of thing. Gaia, of course, was in a lot of pain because of this and even screamed because of it. But Uranus wouldn't stop. So she decided to do something about him, and since divorce didn't exist yet, she decided to castrate him. Just like that, and for that, she created something called gray silex and shaped a large scythe out of it. And she made a plan with her children called the First Titans and talked about what she was feeling, the anguish she had about everything that was happening. She said they could punish their father together, but as soon as she did, all the Titans grew very afraid. Except for one, Cronos, who gathered his courage and told his mother that he would take the scythe and cut off Uranus's balls himself. And of course, Gaia was very happy about that. She hid Cronos in an ambush, saying that she would lie with Uranus one more time, and right in the middle of the act, Cronos would appear and cut off his balls. Remember, one detail about this sickle is that it had irregular teeth. So Uranus's thing wouldn't be cut off all at once. It would be more like a kitchen knife, right? It's even painful to talk about it, but that's exactly how it happened. Gaia called Uranus to have a little fun, and when Uranus came down, Cronos struck him there, and his balls fell into the sea. And at that exact moment, something was born. There would be new beings there in Greek mythology. The drops of blood that spurted out were received by Gaia, and as the seasons passed, she gave birth to the Erinyes, or the Furies, and also to the giants with shining armor and long spears, and the nymphs called Meliae spread all over the earth. And when Uranus's thing fell into the waters, it created a foam, and from that white foam, Aphrodite was born. Well, in the end, in this story here, the children that Uranus fathered, the Titans, were kind of insulted by their father before he left the throne. He said that there would be revenge for him, that Cronos, who would be the next king, would carry a curse. And just like he did with his own father, he would also be dethroned by his children. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share, and hype it up as well. If you'd like to help more, become a channel member for less than 5 Rheas and give great support to keep this work going. And you also get early access to videos and exclusive content. Another way you can help me is by using the Amazon affiliate links that are pinned in the comments. You can buy the book appearing on the screen now by clicking it. I'll leave a Greek mythology book there if you want to explore further. Well, the new king of the universe now would be Cronos. He was a good ruler, despite everything, so much so that his era was called the Golden Age. He ended up marrying his sister, who was the Titaness Rhea. But during this time, he also ended up meeting a nymph named Philyra, who was the daughter of his brother Oceanus. And with her, he had 2 children, actually 3. One who was quite famous, a centaur named Chiron, and also the ichthyocentaurs, who were a pair of sea gods, centaurs with the upper body of men, and also a fishtail. But with Rhea, he also had several children among them. They had the main ones from Olympus, like Hestia, Demeter, Hera of the golden sandals, strong Hades, powerful Poseidon, also known as the Earth Shaker, and wise Zeus. And then Cronos, right? Since he had suffered a curse from his father, Uranus, he started to become extremely paranoid about losing his throne and simply began devouring all his children as they were born, preventing them from growing up and taking his throne. But man, little did he know what he was doing. This is what caused a huge anger in his children, making them fulfill Uranus's prophecy. And just like in the past when Gaia was very angry at Uranus, Rhea also started to become very angry at Cronos. So she did the following when she was about to give birth to Zeus, the father of gods and men. She begged her parents Gaia and Uranus to help her hide the birth of her son, and so that the punishment would reach the mighty Cronos, both for what he had done to his father and for the children he had swallowed. And of course Gaia and Uranus agreed, so the two sent Rhea to Crete, to a rich land in Leto. When she was ready to give birth to Zeus, the youngest of her children, Gaia received the baby in Crete and began to feed and raise him along with the Curetes, who were Gaia's children. When Zeus cried, they would beat their shields to muffle the noise and prevent Cronos from finding him on a dark night. She quickly took him to Lekytos, took him in her arms, and hid him in a distant cave, under the secret places of the sacred earth on Mount Aegean, covered by dense forests. Meanwhile, Cronos, the mighty king of the gods, ended up receiving what he thought was baby Zeus, a large stone. He didn't realize it wasn't Zeus, probably because he was extremely confident and believed he was invincible. Years later, Zeus ended up growing up and his power grew along with him. And Cronos ended up being tricked by the advice of Gaia, by Zeus, and by Metis, who gave him a potion so that he would end up vomiting all the children he had swallowed. And along with them, he also ended up vomiting the stone that was supposed to be Zeus. Zeus even used this stone to fix it on the earth, with broad paths in Pytho under the valleys of Parnassus as an eternal sign and a wonder for mortals. Well then, Zeus ended up joining his siblings, and Cronos joined the Titans, and a war began to see who would rule the universe. But the war was extremely balanced, so Zeus ended up leaving the battlefield and went to free the Hecatoncheires and the Cyclopes that Cronos had imprisoned in his foolishness, thinking they could seize his kingdom too. And as thanks for what Zeus had done, the Cyclopes gave him the lightning bolt as a gift, gave Poseidon the trident, and gave Hades the helmet of invisibility. And when they returned to the battlefield, Zeus began to strike the field with lightning. There, with his bolts, he created an incredible storm that made the earth so hot that the heat could be felt from space. Meanwhile, while he distracted the Titans with the lightning bolts, the Hecatoncheires appeared and threw several huge rocks at the Titans. Not only that, but Zeus also had one more thing on his side. Some Titans were on Zeus's side. When Zeus had summoned all the immortal gods to the top of Olympus, he said that any god, even Titans who fought on his side, would never lose their privilege. And one of those Titans who were on Zeus's side was Styx, who along with her also brought her children Zelos, Nike, Bia, and Kratos. So, the children of Cronos, along with the Hecatoncheires, and also with victory itself on their side, in this case Nike, ended up defeating the Titans and imprisoning them in Tartarus. By order of Zeus, the one who rules the clouds, the Titan gods were hidden in the depths of Tartarus, in a damp and dark place at the ends of the earth. They could not leave from there. Poseidon placed bronze gates in a wall that surrounded everything on all sides. There lived Gis, Kothos, and the great Briareus as faithful guardians of Zeus, the Aegis bearer. But some of the Titans who did not take part in the war ended up being spared, like Oceanus, Hecate, Helios, and Selene. Others received different punishments, like Atlas, who was the general of the Titans, and was made to hold up the sky, Helios and Selene. Others received different punishments, like Atlas, who was the general of the Titans and was made to hold up the sky. Well, after the fall of the Titans, Zeus and his two brothers drew lots to decide how each one would rule over the cosmos. Zeus got the skies, Poseidon got the waters, and Hades got the underworld. The dwelling place of the gods, except for Hades and other gods connected to the underworld, was Olympus. There were Zeus, Hera, Hestia, Demeter, Aphrodite, and Poseidon, and so Zeus became the king of the gods. He ended up taking Metis from the wise council as his first wife. She was the wisest among gods and mortal men. But when Metis was about to give birth to the bright-eyed goddess Athena, Zeus tricked her with some words and swallowed her, following the advice of Gaia and Uranus. They advised him this way so that no other god would take the royal power from that place, for it was destined, together with Metis, to have two very sacred children. The first would be the young Athena, bright-eyed, who would be equal to her father in strength and wisdom. Then, a son with a dominant spirit, destined to rule over gods and men. That's why Zeus ended up simply swallowing Metis and putting her inside himself, Metis, so that these births would happen and the goddess would grant him, also from within himself, enough wisdom about good and evil. But then Zeus ended up kind of having a surprise because his head started to hurt absurdly. And from inside, the goddess Athena came out, who was already ready for war after Metis. Zeus, of course, didn't stop, right? He needed another wife, and in that, he ended up choosing Themis, who would be the goddess of divine law. And with her, he also had some children, or rather daughters. They would be the Horae, the guardians of the order of the world, Eunomia, who would be order, Dike, who was justice, and the flourishing Irene, who would be peace. They take care of the actions of mortal men. And the Moirai were also born, to whom wise Zeus granted the greatest honor, which was to take care of the fate of mortal men. And they gave Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. And after joining with Metis and Themis, Zeus ended up acting like a charlatan, and he decided to choose yet another wife, who was Eurynome, the daughter of Oceanus. And from this couple, the three Graces were born, Aglaea, Euphrosyne, and Thalia. And do you think Zeus stopped there? No. He had yet another wife. And just to be clear, here I'm talking about wives, not diamonds. I'm only talking about Zeus's wives. And one thing that most people don't know, or even forget, is that Zeus didn't just marry Hera, he also married Demeter, with whom he had Persephone. And once again, after marrying Demeter, Zeus also joined with Mnemosyne, the one with beautiful hair. And from this union, the 9 muses were born, the goddesses of poets, singers, and so on. The famous ones with golden crowns. After these wives, Zeus had 2 more. He was also involved with Leto, who was a Titaness, and Leto ended up getting pregnant. But before this pregnancy was completed, Zeus also ended up getting involved with his last official wife, who was the goddess Hera. Zeus tried to woo Hera several times, but she always refused him, until Zeus ended up transforming himself into a bird, a cuckoo, in a pitiful state. He appeared to Hera, who felt sorry for him, and took in the cuckoo. At that moment, Zeus revealed his true form, and he lay with Hera, thus consummating the marriage. As a wedding gift, Gaia gave the goddess Hera a tree of golden apples, which Hera left under the care of the Hesperides. Well, it turns out that Hera found out that Leto was pregnant and ended up relentlessly pursuing her. She kept driving Leto from one land to another, preventing her from finding a place where she could rest and give birth, until finally, she arrived at the floating island of Delos, allowing her to have her children there, who would be called Apollo and Artemis. But there was one last attack from Hera. Hera ended up sending a giant monster there called Typhon, which was a serpent. Apollo ended up killing this monster while still in Leto's arms, using a bow and arrow. Apollo and Artemis ended up being taken to Olinda. From the union of Zeus and Hera, the couple's only official child was born. That was Ares, who would later become extremely impulsive and also become a god of war, a bloody one. Hera, on her own and out of jealousy of Zeus's children, especially the goddess Athena, who was conceived outside of Hera's marriage, ended up creating a god by herself, Hephaestus. Hephaestus was born weak and crippled, and because of that, he was known as the lame god. Hera didn't like him very much and ended up simply throwing Hephaestus off Mount Olympus. He fell in free fall all day before landing in the sea. Nymphs rescued him and brought him to Lemnos, where the islanders cared for him. But Zeus's mischief didn't stop there. He also got involved with Maia, one of the Pleiades, and here she was really his lover. She was one of the daughters of Atlas, and she ended up hiding on Mount Selene, where she gave birth to a child known as Hermes, an extremely intelligent and mischievous child. Hermes secretly escaped from Mount Selene, and he stole some cattle from the god Apollo, and he did it in a rather brilliant way, making the cattle walk backwards. That way, it looked like they were going in the opposite direction. Anyway, Hermes ended up sacrificing some of these cows to the gods of Olympus in order to gain their favor. Also, the numerologist Hermes believes that Hermes ended up being the inventor of fire exactly because of this sacrifice. And after the sacrifice, Hermes went back home and found a turtle along the way, which he also used as a sacrifice. He used the cow's intestines and the turtle shell to create the first lyre. Filling his mother with ignorance, he convinced Maia that he wasn't the one responsible for stealing the cows. But Zeus ended up showing up and forced a meeting between him and Apollo himself. Hermes started playing a lyre he had created, and Apollo, seeing this, ended up agreeing to let Hermes keep the cattle in exchange for the instrument. And with that, Hermes ended up ascending to Olympus and becoming a messenger of the gods. He also worked for Hades, taking souls to the ferryman Charon, the son of Nyx. Since there were still some empty seats on Olympus, Zeus then fell in love with a mortal named Semele, a princess of Thebes. Zeus ended up sleeping with her. When Hera found out, she set a trap for Semele, tricked the young woman, and made her ask Zeus to swear to appear before her in all his divine glory. And bound by an oath, Zeus ended up granting Semele's request and appeared to her in the form of lightning. And with that, Semele was simply consumed by the fire of the lightning, and Semele was pregnant. Zeus managed to save the child and placed it in his thigh so it could continue to develop. And from this, Dionysus was born. This god spent his entire childhood outside Olympus because, after his birth, to escape the relentless Hera, he was taken by Hermes to be raised elsewhere. Because of Ino, Hera, enraged by this act, punished the couple by driving both Ino and her husband Athamas insane. Zeus then, afraid of what Hera might do to Dionysus, ended up taking him to Nysa, so he could be raised by nymphs and satyrs. And it was during this period that Dionysus discovered the art of making wine, as well as the effects the drink had on people and mortals. His followers were made up of various mythical figures, such as, for example, Silenus, and also the Maenads and satyrs, who accompanied him carrying vine branches, ivy crowns, wine cups, bunches of grapes, and the thyrsus entwined with foliage. The Maenads and the Bacchae were young women who were seized by mystical madness and seemed to be always possessed by the god. The Silenus lived in a state of drunkenness and was endowed with great wisdom and the gift of prophecy. The satyrs symbolized the uncontrollable force of nature, both plant and animal. Dionysus then began to wander the world and only returned to approach the gods when Zeus had summoned several gods there. To try to solve a problem with Hephaestus, Hephaestus had learned the art of metallurgy and decided to take revenge on his mother. The goddess Hera ended up creating a golden throne and sent it to him, and when Hera sat on it, she got stuck. Zeus then decided to offer Aphrodite as a gift, or rather as a prize, to whoever could defeat Hephaestus and save Hera. Ares even tried, but he kind of ended up entering Hephaestus's forge, got some sparks in his face, and ran away. Dionysus approached Hephaestus, gave him a drink, and Hephaestus got a bit drunk. Then Dionysus said that if he freed Hera, he would get a reward, which was Aphrodite. Hephaestus did that, won Aphrodite's hand, and went up to Olympus with Dionysus. And with that, we have all the famous gods of Olympus already gathered. Zeus, the king of the gods, lord of the sky, thunder, and lightning. Hera, the goddess of marriage, family, and royalty. Poseidon, god of the seas, earthquakes, and storms. Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, harvest, fertility and the earth, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and just war, Apollo, god of light, prophecy, music, medicine, the arts, the sun, and many other things. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, wild nature and the moon, Ares, the god of violent war, chaos and combat, Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and desire, Hephaestus, god of fire, the forge and metallurgy, Hermes, the messenger of the gods, god of communication, travel, and cunning, Hestia, the goddess of the hearth and the domestic fire, and Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and theater. In ancient times, but already during the reign of Zeus, Epimetheus and his brother Prometheus were tasked with bringing life to earth. Epimetheus created the animals and Prometheus created humans. Prometheus got along well with the Olympian gods, even though he was a Titan. However, something ended up changing. Once during the reign of Zeus, when gods and men were competing against each other in Minoke, Prometheus, intending to deceive Zeus, decided to rival him. With caution, he cut up an ox and divided it into two parts. He wrapped the best portions and the entrails in the hide, and on top placed the stomach, which is one of the worst parts, while the second pile consisted only of bones covered in fat. And he asked Zeus to choose between these parts, and when Zeus realized what Prometheus had done, he became very angry with him. And the father of the gods then ended up taking revenge on Prometheus by taking fire away from his children, who were men, but Prometheus ended up stealing this fire inside a tube. Zeus, to punish men, then ordered Hephaestus to mold a virgin from the earth, Pandora, to whom Athena ended up giving and placing in her all the charms meant to seduce mortals. Meanwhile, Prometheus was chained up next to a pillar, where an eagle sent by Zeus would devour his liver all day long, and that liver would regenerate during the night, and the next day, the eagle would return again. Luckily, Heracles ended up killing the eagle and freeing this sufferer later with Zeus's consent. And Zeus only did this to allow Heracles to eventually ascend to Olympus as an immortal as well. But, going back to Pandora, he ended up sending her to Epimetheus, who, despite being warned by his brother, promised not to accept any gift from Zeus. He ended up ignoring this advice and accepted Pandora, who had been sent by Zeus through Ernest. And Pandora was carrying a jar with her, and as soon as she was there on earth with Epimetheus, she opened the lid of the jar, and from it came all the evils on earth. Now, going back a bit to life on Mount Olympus, we had the marriage of Hephaestus and Aphrodite, which didn't even get a chance to be happy. That's because, in reality, there was already a long-standing interest between Aphrodite and Ares. The two of them started meeting in secret, in the house of Hephaestus himself, who was Aphrodite's husband. Ares had already given many gifts to the goddess, crowned with flowers, and in doing so, dishonored the bed of Lord Hephaestus. But Helios, the sun god, saw the couple together and rushed to tell everything. For Hephaestus, the news was, of course, shocking to him. Hephaestus, of course, immediately began to think of revenge against the two. Hephaestus placed a large anvil in his house and forged unbreakable chains made to trap lovers. Silently, he devised a plan and spread those chains around the bed and across the ceiling, so light and invisible that not even gods could notice them. When he finished, he pretended to travel to Lemnos, a place he loved very much. Ares noticed that Hephaestus was leaving and of course already had an erection up in the sky. And as soon as Hephaestus left, the god of war ran to the house, overcome by desire. And Aphrodite had just returned. When Ares arrived, he took her hand and said that Hephaestus was far away, over in Lemnos. Aphrodite liked the idea, and the two went to bed. But as soon as they lay down, the invisible chains closed in on them. They couldn't move or escape and soon realized they were trapped. At that exact moment, Hephaestus returned before reaching Lemnos, because Helios had told him everything, that they had been trapped. Overcome with anger, he entered the house and shouted, calling Zeus and all the gods who lived there on Mount Olympus. He said that Aphrodite had betrayed him because he was lame, while Ares was handsome and agile. He showed the lovers trapped in his own bed and declared that he would only set them free when Zeus returned the wedding gifts that Hephaestus had given. The gods then gathered at the entrance of the house. Poseidon, Hermes, and Apollo came quickly, but the goddesses stayed hidden because they were ashamed. When they saw the scene, the gods couldn't hold back their laughter, commenting that the cunning of slow Hephaestus had overcome the speed and agility of Ares. Poseidon, however, did not laugh. He asked Hephaestus to release Ares and promised that the debt would be paid. In front of everyone, Hephaestus refused at first, suspicious, but Poseidon assured him that he would pay himself if necessary. Faced with this, Hephaestus gave in and released the chains. As soon as they were freed, the lovers fled immediately. Ares left for Thrace. Aphrodite returned to Paphos in Cyprus, the city where she was very beloved. From the union of Ares and Aphrodite, Harmonia, Phobos, and Deimos were born. And speaking of love affairs, Persephone, who was far from her mother. Demeter, the lady of the golden sword and abundant fruits, was playing in a soft meadow with the daughters of Oceanus, picking flowers like roses, crocuses, violets, irises, and hyacinths, and the narcissus, a marvelous flower that Gaia, the earth, made bloom by the will of Zeus to please the Lord of many. From the root of the narcissus, hundreds of flowers bloomed, their sweet scent making the sky, earth, and sea seem to smile with joy. Enchanted, the young woman reached out to pick one. At that moment, the earth opened up again in the field of Nysa, and from there emerged Hades, the son of Cronos, the god of many names. Driving his immortal horses, he took her against her will, placed her in the golden chariot, and departed with her, while she cried and screamed, calling for her father Zeus, the highest among the gods. But no one heard her cry, neither gods nor mortals, not even the olive trees heavy with fruit. Only Hecate, who, with a compassionate heart, heard from her cave, and also Helios, the bright sun, son of Hyperion. Zeus, however, was far away in his own time, receiving offerings from men. Thus Hades, with Zeus's permission, took away the daughter of his own brother, even though it was completely against her will. While the goddess could still see the earth, the starry sky, the fish-filled sea, and the sunlight. While she still hoped to see her beloved mother and the eternal gods again, her heart resisted the pain, and her immortal voice echoed through the mountains and the depths of the sea, until Demeter, her majestic mother, finally heard her, and Demeter wanted her daughter back and set out to find her. However, something happened during this search. While Demeter was looking for her daughter, a problem arose. Poseidon started following her. He was interested in her, in Demeter. So to escape from him, she transformed into a mare and began grazing among the waters of Ochaos in Arcadia. Realizing the trick, Poseidon also changed his form and turned into a stallion, and thus joined with her. At first, they say Demeter was overcome with anger because of what had happened. Later, however, she set her anger aside and allowed herself to bathe in the river Ladon. From this union, they say that Demeter also had a daughter, whose name cannot be revealed to the uninitiated, and a horse was also born, called Arion. Well, still talking about Demeter's search for Persephone, Demeter was simply terrified by what had happened to her daughter. She wandered from place to place looking for her. Because of this, she forgot her duties to mankind. Normally, as the goddess of the harvest, of wheat, of all plants, her role was to watch over agricultural production. With Demeter's absence, the wheat refused to sprout, the plants stopped growing, and the earth ended up becoming completely barren. Well, the sun, who saw what was happening there, right, that is Helios, revealed to Demeter where her daughter was. At first, she was relieved to know that Persephone was alive, but when she found out who was with her, in this case, Hades, she demanded that Zeus set her free. However, Hades refused to let his companion leave, and Demeter then decided to abandon all her duties for good. She didn't care how the immortal gods would live without her. She also couldn't live without her daughter. She then took on the appearance of an old woman and voluntarily exiled herself on earth. This was a cruel period for mankind. Once again, the soil dried up and hunger threatened the human race. Then, the gods gathered and agreed to try to convince Hades to return Persephone. But then, they discovered another problem. Persephone had tasted pomegranate seeds down in the underworld, which meant she couldn't stay out of the underworld, at least not all the time. But then, they made another deal. For part of the year, Persephone would stay with Demeter, and during that time it would be spring. And for the other part, she would stay with Hades. And that's how the winter season would come about, because of Demeter's sadness. And now, going back to Poseidon, we have his most famous love, right? His love with Medusa, one of the three Gorgons, daughters of Phorcys and Ceto. Medusa was already a monster from the beginning, and she ended up lying with Poseidon in a field of flowers. And they had children, but they would only be born much later. Poseidon also ended up entering a dispute with the goddess Athena for the city of Athens, Whoever gave the best gift would be chosen as the god. There in the city, Poseidon ended up creating the horse, and Athena created an olive tree and ended up winning. Because of that, Poseidon cast a curse on the city, causing a great drought there. And now, speaking about Hermes, he passed through Arcadia, the land of many springs and abundant herds, where his sacred place was located. Right there, even as a god, he took care of curly-wool sheep serving a mortal man. For he was seized by a strong desire to marry the beautiful-haired daughter of Hydriops. In that place, he held a very joyful wedding. In her house a son was born, beloved by Hermes, who was wonderful to behold from birth. He had goat's feet and 2 horns, a noisy and always smiling child, and when the nurse saw his strange face and thick beard, she was terrified. Jumping up, she ran away, abandoning the boy. Then Hermes, bringer of good fortune, took the boy in his arms, very happy, and quickly brought him to the dwelling of the immortal gods. Wrapped in warm mountain hareskins, he placed him beside Zeus, showing him to the other gods. All the immortal gods rejoiced, especially Dionysus, the god of madness, and they called the boy Pan because he gladdened the hearts of all the gods. He may have gladdened the gods, but not very much. The nymph was called Syrinx, who was a water nymph, known for her beauty and for her firm decision to remain pure. Many satyrs and even gods of the woods tried to pursue her, but Syrinx always escaped. In her simple and chaste life, she only worshipped Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, and dressed like her. At first glance, she could even be mistaken for the goddess herself if it weren't for the lack of the bow with Artemis's sacred gold. One day, the god Pan, returning from Mount Lycaeus with his head crowned with pine branches, saw Syrinx and was enchanted by her. Hearing his words, Meninfa became frightened and fled non-stop through the wilderness until she reached the calm banks of the river Ladon. There, with nowhere else to escape, she asked her water sisters for help, begging them to transform her. At the exact moment when Pan thought he had caught her, his arms touched only the tall reeds of the marsh. Syrinxa had been transformed when the god sighed in sadness. The wind blew through the reeds and produced a thin, sad sound, like an enchanted lament. With that new music, Pan said that he and she would live together forever. Then he cut the reeds into different lengths, tied them with wax, and made a flute. This instrument was always carried with him, the so-called Syrinx flute. However, Pan's most successful conquest, let's say, is none other than the goddess Selene, the goddess of the moon, who would actually be the moon itself. In fact, the legend says that he seduced Selene after disguising himself, wearing the white skin of a lamb so as not to scare her away with his appearance. When she saw the fake lamb, Selene was attracted by the beauty of its skin. She came down from the heavens to ride it and thus wander through the hills. In exchange for the ride, the fake lamb asked Selene to grant him a wish. Selene accepted the deal and said she was willing to do whatever he wanted, probably already knowing what he was going to ask for. After the ride, Pan and Selene fully enjoyed each other, and later, Pan gave her a herd of completely white oxen, which she used to pull her night chariot. Sometime later, after a period of peace there on Olympus, there was a moment when Zeus, the son of Cronos, almost lost his dominion over Olympus. Hera, Poseidon, and Athena joined forces to go against him and take him off the throne, deciding to chain him up. The plan was put into action, and Zeus was even imprisoned with chains by the Olympian gods themselves. At that moment of danger, Tethys, the Nereid, realized what was happening, and she was the only one among the immortals who came to the rescue of the king of the gods. She went there and simply called one of the Hecatoncheires to free Zeus. Briareus, known by the gods by that name and also by Tethys, she realized that Briareus by the gods. When Briareus sat by Zeus's side, displaying his strength, the gods who had rebelled became very afraid. Because of this, the chains were undone and Zeus was set free. Thus, the conspiracy ended without a fight. Hera, Poseidon, and Athena gave up, and Zeus kept the throne. This episode was remembered as a rare moment when supreme power was threatened, but saved by Tethys and the intimidating princess of Briareus. Well, the story of the Gigantomachy begins with the lament and fury of Gaia, the mother of the earth, and resigned to the defeat of her previous children, the Titans, who had been thrown by Zeus into the depths of Tartarus. And, as you can see, in practically every rebellion Gaia is involved, She's never satisfied with anything. It's impressive. As I told you at the beginning of the story, when Uranus's sack was cut, from his blood the giants were born, creatures that were colossal and of incalculable brute strength, and apparently had thick hair and long beards. But what was most astonishing were their extremities, because instead of human feet, many of them had serpent tails that twisted around their immense bodies. Among these extremely formidable beings, figures like the unbeatable Alcyoneus and the furious Porphyrion stood out, leading the charge. Driven by their mother's hatred, the giants began to violently challenge divine sovereignty. They tore entire mountains from the ground and stacked them to create a staircase to the sky, hurling massive rocks and burning trees against the sacred dwelling of the gods. The universe trembled with the advance of these monsters, and Gaia still tried to protect them by producing a magical herb that would make them immune to attacks from deities. However, Zeus was faster, and forbidding the sun and the moon from shining, harvested the plant in the darkness, depriving his enemies of this final protection. But even so, the gods faced a problem, because the prophecy said that the giants could only be killed if a mortal fought alongside them. It was then that Heracles, the greatest hero of Greece, was summoned to the battlefield. The ensuing confrontation was one of the greatest wars in mythology. While the gods fought with their elemental powers, the giants fought back with the incredible brute physical strength they possessed. Alcyoneus, the greatest of them, seemed invincible, because whenever he fell wounded in his homeland, the very earth healed him and renewed his strength. Realizing this, Heracles, under the guidance of the wise Athena, dragged the monster away from the ground and struck him down with his arrows. The battle continued with overwhelming fury throughout the known world. Zeus struck his enemies with his lightning bolts, while Porphyrion tried, in vain, to attack the goddess Hera. Poseidon, lord of the seas, chased the giant polyboats across the waves, tearing off a piece of the island of Kos. With his trident, he crushed his opponent with the weight of the rock. On another front, Athena demonstrated her strength by lifting the island of Sicily and hurling it onto an Enceladus, burying him alive forever. Other gods, like Apollo, Artemis, and Dionysus, also defeated every possible opponent, but it was always the mortal Heracles who delivered the final blow to each of them, ensuring they would not return. At the end of the massacre, the giants were completely subdued and confined beneath mountains and volcanoes. On Earth, Olympus finally consolidated its dominion over the cosmos, putting an end to the last great rebellion against its authority, the last one so far. With the defeat of the Titans, and now also the giants, the Earth was still dissatisfied. Gaia joined with Tartarus to create a terrible and extremely powerful creature, Typhon. He was born as a prodigy of strength, destined to be the final punishment against the gods of Olympus. His size was unimaginable, and his body was a mixture of divinity and nightmare. From his shoulders sprouted 100 serpent and viper heads, which stuck out dark tongues, and from each of his eyes blazed a burning fire that seemed to scorch everything. Besides his terrifying appearance, Typhon possessed a multitude of voices that echoed in a sinister way. Sometimes he spoke in a way that the gods could understand. At other times, he uttered roars like an enraged bull, the cries of a relentless lion, or even the barking of a female dog in the sharp shadows that made the mountains tremble. The threat was so serious that Typhon would have become the lord of all beings, mortal and immortal, if Zeus had not acted quickly when he realized the danger. The Lord of the gods hurled a thunderbolt so powerful and harsh that it made the whole world resound, from the sky and the sea to the depths of Tartarus. The earth shook beneath Zeus's feet as he prepared for battle. The heat generated by the clash was unbearable, mixing the divine lightning with the winds and the fire spewed by the monster. The earth, the sky, and the ocean boiled, and the waves crashed violently against the shore, creating a tremor that even made Hades tremble. The dead and the titans imprisoned in the abyss trembled in fear at the magnitude of the battle. Zeus, in a moment of total fury, leapt from the tremor unscathed. Armed with his most powerful thunderbolts and lightning, he struck Typhon directly, hitting each of his heads. With the celestial fire, the monster, mutilated and scourged by successive blows, was finally brought down, falling with a weight that made the earth groan. At the moment of the fall, the flames coming from the giant's body gushed through the valleys and mountains, melting the ground around him. The earth burned and melted like metal in a blacksmith's furnace, turning into a liquid mass. Under the heat of divine punishment without any mercy, Zeus hurled the rest of Typhon into the depths of Tartarus so that he could never challenge the heavens again. However, even defeated and imprisoned, Typhon's spirit continued to affect the world of men. From him were born humid and furious winds, which caused blinding storms at sea, different from the good winds sent by the gods. These evil gusts scattered ships and caused the ruin of sailors, those who could not withstand their force. On land, these same destructive winds cover the blooming fields with dust and destroy the crops mercilessly. Testimonies of pain remain as the final reminder of the greatest monster's power against the gods. From here, the gods of Olympus consolidated their power and began to take action. In the world of mortals, heroes like Perseus, Heracles, and even events like Ellida and the Odyssey emerged. But that will be for part 2. And if you want, leave a comment. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, share, and hype it up too. See you next time.